Welcome to Wonder Without the Fear. Today we have Teresa Yanaros of Divine Frequency. She is a journalist, an author of What is Magic, and she also does speaking events, podcasting, and she does coaching for finding your soul purpose and also doing business media. Welcome to the show, Teresa.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm so excited to be here.
Cool. So let's let the audience know who you are. How did you start Divine Frequency, and what is Divine Frequency?
Yeah, great question. So let's see, where do I want to start? So before I was born, I want to tell you a little bit about the family that I was born into. So my family was actually stationed at RAF Woodbridge during the time of the Rendlesham Forest incident, which is a world-renowned UFO sighting. And so they were there for that. That was in 1980. And then I was born after that. So I was born into a family that was already into things like government conspiracy and UFOs and that kind of thing. And then we moved to Virginia, and I was raised Catholic. And at our church, the priest was giving a sermon when the statue of Mary began to cry. And so this was like a miracle, right? And it was observed by a lot of people. This was in Time magazine. It happened multiple times. And so this kind of sets the groundwork for who I was as a child. I was around things like potentially miracles and then this concept of UFO sightings. And so I was obsessed with this idea that magic was real and that the truth was hidden and needed to be uncovered and discovered. So I became a journalist. I went to school for journalism. I graduated in 2008 from the University of Texas at Arlington. And that was when the market crashed. I ended up going into property management in the tech industry for a while. I went into product management and coaching. And then I went through this huge shift where I looked around. I realized like I'm in a matrix. I want to do something more. So I quit my job at the age of, I think I was like 25 or 26. And I started traveling and I wrote a book, What is Magic? I started talking about spirituality. I underwent this huge spiritual shift. I started doing all kinds of research. And then I eventually started Divine Frequency in February of 2016 as a YouTube channel in order to kind of reach out to the community of people that were interested in talking about the same spiritual topics that I was discussing. And then about 6 months after I started Divine Frequency, that was when I started talking about UFOs. And that completely shifted the channel for me. I started getting invited to conferences and meeting a lot of people in the UFO community. So like, I guess ufology, you could call it. And that kind of shifted things. And I started covering more things about UFOs. And so I've been kind of covering both. Spirituality and UFOs is kind of like what you'll get when you come to Divine Frequency. But I love doing research. So I do a lot of research. I love collaborations. So I do a lot of interviews. And then as well as I love helping people step into their own soul purposes, tapping into what it is that they are passionate about and really bringing that out. So I do help people with branding. I help people with starting their own social media channels and business strategy and content strategy and networking strategy and things like that.
Awesome. That's cool. Can you let us know if there was a particular incident in your life that you realized, is there one particular moment you're like, I'm not in Kansas anymore? I guess you kind of grew up that way, but what drove you into this UFO field in the beginning?
It's a really good question. And I guess I could say that I've had a few different circumstances or instances in my life that have really made me feel topsy-turvy. And that's kind of like what us as quote unquote truth seekers or in alternative media, that's I think what drives a lot of us is those moments and those experiences, and then we learn and grow. But to answer your question directly, I can think back to specifically getting into ufology. For me, it was like I started watching Gaia TV, and I started researching ufology more in depth because there are like lots of different circumstances that people talk about that were like reminding me of things that I had gone through as a child, and then some of the military bases that my dad was stationed at. And so for me, it was like very personal. My reasons for getting into ufology were very related to me wanting to discover more about knowing my own upbringing and my family. You know, my dad being a fighter pilot stationed at, RAF Woodbridge during the Rendlesham Forest incident was a huge part of it. But then also going back to my grandfather, after he died, my dad found his notebook. And in this notebook, my grandfather was in the Navy, and he talks about seeing a UFO coming out of the ocean when he was on a naval carrier. And so it kind of has gone down the lineage generationally in my family. Everybody in my family was like very thick with military background on both sides of my family. So I think that was a huge part of it for me. But I think what really grounded this whole thing in for a new way for me was my own personal experience with UFOs. I mean, you and I met at ECETI, which is, for those of you who don't know, a ranch in Washington where there are a lot of UFO sightings. And so that was a part of it. But then I had like an extraterrestrial / a gray alien experience, which just coming out of my mouth, it sounds weird. But I remember at one point when I ended up at a conference on an experiencers panel, and I'm sitting there going like, I'm just a normal person. Like, I have a background in journalism. Like, it was shocking to, when you realize like I'm being grouped in with a community of people called experiencers. And so that has been very much so like Alice in Wonderland for me. When you identify yourself as a normal person and then you're having these experiences, it's a trip.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, like for myself, like I remember being very young and having a dream, the exact same dream from when I was young. I don't know how young I was till I was like in my like early 20s, probably, but maybe even later 20s, reoccurring dream of just like at my grandparents' house, and from my grandparents' house, I was like seeing myself above myself, and I'm able to see this like gray being, and I'm just like probably about 3 because I was the same height. I don't know, but I'm just like holding this hand, and I just remember that dream, and I had that exact, and it's the same length. There's no more to it, but I was just like, what's that about it? And I don't know. Is it just a dream? Not sure, but it was something that it drove me into something. So
did you ever get a sense of like any kind of emotional feelings during the dream? Like, did you get any sense?
I woke up usually in a lot of the time I woke up being fearful. But but as I got older, I just would wake up and I'm like, why am I having this exact same dream of being around 3 or 4 years old, a toddler, and like walking down this hall, so that was my sort of experiences. And I've also had experiences where one of my biggest ones that I remember, I was, besides ECETI, was being I lived in Newfoundland for like 4 months, which is the very east coast of Canada, if people don't know. And I was just hanging out with some friends, and it was night out, and there were stars out. The ice was still there, so we were walking out onto the lake, and we're just like, hey, let's look at the stars. We're looking at the stars because you could really see them. And there was this huge, I guess, pyramid type shaped thing, and it would sort of rotate with different colors, and then like the ice started to break, and we got freaked out and ran. But yeah, all these different experiences. And I've had other things that, I mean, that was one of the ones that was just like, okay, this is not, from this earth, probably. And then I've had other experiences where it's a dart across the sky and then does like a 90-degree turn or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's not a satellite. I don't know what it is. But these are the questions that always brought up in my mind were all of these events. So, and then also 9/11 always brought me down the conspiracy level, like instantaneously as soon as that happened. So that's sort of how I got into all this stuff. Speaking of backing up into what we're getting into, we finally got an admission from the Pentagon in the United States about these Tic Tac UFOs, etc., even though I thought it was already done in 2017, but whatever. They're re-emitting it, I guess. So where do you think that we're going to next in this whole drip of disclosure from our perspective anyway?
I mean, I don't really know, to be completely honest with you. It does seem like, just taking it back to what you were just talking about, as far as like everyone in the world having these collective experiences of, high strangeness and dreams of beings, and then seeing UFOs and all this stuff. I mean, just grouped all into the unknown. This is something that we've been going through for a long time as a collective, all different kinds of people. And so you have like this kind of dissonance between people having experiences and then looking to the government to say that it's real. So there's that facet. But I also do think that this needs to sort of be broken into two categories. This is the way that I perceive this anyway. We have the aspect of military disclosure and then the unknown disclosure. And so it's like, I feel like, unfortunately, this gets kind of grouped into all one category when this is highly complex. So it's really like we need to describe a distinction here and just make sure that we're hammering that in, because I come from a military background. You know, my dad was in the military. Most of the men in my family were in the military. I understand that there's a level of, you know, security that we need to have. And so there are absolutely secret things that the government doesn't tell us. Now, I personally don't think, I'm not like an advocate for like, oh, bring all the secrets out, because I understand that there are different pockets of need to know things and different dimensions and of thought. And there are just certain things that we don't necessarily need disclosed to us. Now, that's just my opinion. I know that there are people that would just completely disagree with me on that, but that's what makes this whole community awesome, because we all disagree on lots of things. But as far as that goes, I think that you know, the announcement that was made where the Pentagon said that the Tic Tac footage was legit, it was just kind of like, okay, yeah, that's great. I know that initially my reaction was, okay, so now the UFO community that's been arguing about this is just going to find something else to argue about. It's like you have different pockets of types of people or demographics within the UFO community, if you can even call it that, I guess, yeah, the larger umbrella of UFO community, that have different kind of ways of perceiving or filtering data. And it seems like however that beingness is or that perspective is, it's like, it doesn't matter what the data is, it's going to be filtered through that perspective. So, you know, when we have these kinds of conversations, depending on who you are or how you perceive reality, you're going to experience the information in a different way. You know, for me, like looking at mainstream media saying, okay, we're going to go ahead and accept that this is officially a UFO. It's like, okay, so what? That's fine, whatever. But you also realize that anything, and I know this as a media person, anything coming into the general public's eye, by the time it gets to mainstream media or it gets to the article that you're reading on the internet, it's gone through so many iterations, and there's so much more that's going on behind the scenes that we're not seeing. Public media is just the tippy top of the iceberg of what's actually going on. So as long as we're aware of that and we can appreciate that, then that's all great. But I also do think that as far as disclosure goes, like, it's really just a reflection of who we are as people. And so on more of like a metaphysical level, I try to take it into that arena, as you know, because, you know, I'm very comfortable in the woo. But I think that we don't really need to look outside of ourselves to tell us something that we know. If we know something and it's real, then the need to look externally for validation goes away. And so I do think that there's a level of machine, and I talk about the disclosure machine on my YouTube channel, where like you can get looped into these concepts that you cling to, and instead of just going in and taking something, and then it's like our lives are really like a philosophical game of catch and release. We really shouldn't be trying to like grasp or hold on to anything for too long. Like we're interfacing with our reality, and it's part of the experience. But I don't necessarily personally feel frustration toward the government or the external to tell me what I feel like I'm personally discovering on my own.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it? Like we're about, like, I mean, a reason I called my podcast what it is, Wonder Without the Fear, is so that we can go down through the, you know, the wonder of life and just go out, and like when you release that fear, then we're able to just like look at our own belief systems. We're able to look at, you know, just all the mystery that is life. And when you open up to that, it's amazing what people will end up into your life, what weird things will happen to you, whether it's just you know, witnessing a UFO or seeing some other thing in your event, just like synchronicities, serendipities. I mean, this is the really cool thing about life, and I know that you've you know, done that with your life. Can you give us some examples of synchronicities and serendipities that you're just like blown, even to this day, you're like, what, did that just happen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, and I'd like to kind of take this into a practical arena too. It's sort of like when
Mm-hmm.
you are living in this liminal space, which is like embracing the unknown, not beholding yourself to patterns from the past, or kind of limiting yourself to thinking that things are going to be how they were. What you do is you actually switch your thinking into what I call quantum mindset. I talk about this a lot on my YouTube channel, but this allowing or permission for the world to surprise you. And I think that it's so important for us to become conscious of that ability that we have and really to let go. And this is where the whole process of letting go comes in. And so this is actually something that I was just meditating on last night, is this just kind of process of letting go and letting your heart speak to you. Our heart is where our soul resides. Some people say the brain, some people say the heart, but I guess it kind of, there's a entrainment there. But I think the idea behind it is when you are open and you're not contracted in fear, but you're open with the ability to allow magic into your life, then you're going to be walking forward in a way that you're going to be looking for this like resonance that you're already putting out there. And that's when you start to see things come back. I think like, I guess an example I can give you of this is when I first started Divine Frequency, I had like a whiteboard, and I would write my goals on this whiteboard when I first started. And I realized that when I would write these goals down, they were coming true within like days. And so it was like this weird sense of like, how is this even happening? You know, you're talking about synchronicity, and your world starts to synchronize when you are letting your heart lead, and what you can call that as like your connection to God or your connection to source, or like who you truly are. And when you are living in fear, you're actually letting this false ego, I'll call it the false ego, because I believe we have an authentic ego, which is good. And then the false ego, or the false self, you're believing that that's real when it's really not. So when you start to believe that the fear is real, it starts to take over your life. But when you realize that that's just an illusion and it's trying to trick you into basically shutting off your own soul connection, you realize that that has no power over you anymore, because the power that is in you is your connection to source. So when you really ground into that, then you realize like you are an eternal being, and you have gifts and talents and all of these things that are completely unique to you, that were given to you in this life, that you're supposed to be using. And whenever you realize that that is the purpose here, then you can kind of let go so much about like what that looks like and how that looks like, because you're quite literally living in the eternal now, that where all the possibility exists. You have rejected the programming from the past, or the unconscious programming that puts your feet exactly where they were, because that's what you're used to. And it also cuts you off from future tripping about how you think the future is going to be, because you're basing those ideas off of what you think from the past. So you have to cut both of those sides out so that you can tap into that eternal now, that liminal space, that field of infinite potentiality, that quantum field, so that you can actually pull these synchronicities into your life. And then it starts to just, you're really allowing God to place your steps at that point.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, yeah, I find that absolutely fascinating. I'm always going back. Sometimes I find myself going back and forth between these, like, I don't know if you want to call it the quantum realm, and then like my old habits. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that's not as much fun as just allowing this thing to unfold. And, when I decided to do this, the minute that I started, like, okay, I'm going to do this, people just entered into my life, and I have people that I'm going to be interviewing, and contacted some old friends like yourself, and they're just like, yeah, of course I'm going to do it. Like, yeah, like, and they're like, why weren't you doing this before? I'm like, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, this is where the real fun begins, and the more people that start taking on that path. And I think more and more people should start using their voice, using these platforms. Like this is where we change, as Bruce Lipton would say, create the heaven on earth, right? So can you talk a little bit about the correlation between the subconscious maybe and your understanding of the quantum
Absolutely.
realities?
So yeah, so the subconscious mind is really where the magic happens. So when we are living in our beta brainwave state, or our conscious waking reality, we're being conscious, we're being aware. There's a level of that. But when you really want to get down into our feelings, our emotions, the underlying surface, what's under the water of consciousness, of why we feel the way we feel, why we act the way we act, why we believe the things we believe, all of these things are underneath the surface in the subconscious mind, which is in the limbic part of the brain. Like, you function in the neocortex in your daily waking life. And then when you go down into meditative states, you're slowing your heart rate, you're slowing your brainwave state, you're dropping out of that neocortex, you're going into the limbic brain, you're dropping down underneath the surface into the subconscious. And when you're there, what happens is these thoughts that are usually taking over your mind, like, oh, what am I going to make for dinner tonight? Oh, what is this next thing that's due tomorrow? All these thoughts that are constantly going through and filtering through your mind when you're in your beta brainwave state, all that starts to go away, and you're going down into more of your soul reality. You're in that quiet space. You're in that receptive space. When you go down into that space, now what happens is you can actually tap into the field here, because you're no longer perceiving what's this material reality outside of you, this physical world. You've gone into the depths of the quantum field space, where you can access all of the information that really is you. It helps you, or teaches you really, about your soul connection to the source. And this is where, like I said, the magic happens. So a lot of this, like, you can work on bringing your attention to certain places in your body. We hold emotion in our body. And so when we meditate, we can actually practice moving our consciousness into certain spots in our body to focus love into them. So there's a lot of healing that you can do in this state. And then there's a lot of imagineering you can do in this state. You can also, like, when you get out of that beta brainwave state, you bring it down into theta, you can actually get a lot of ideas from the quantum field, and from your what some people call the higher self, or your true self. So it's really a lot of fun that you can have in that state. And that's why I think, for me, when I started learning meditation, it really shifted my world, because I was able to be more receptive to just newness. And I think that goes hand in hand with also having a good group of people around you that are healthy for you. So there's that. And then, because we live in a world where there's a facet of community. Community is extremely important. So there's that. And then also just having mentors and people that you feel like you can trust, that you can talk to about different things that you're learning. It's really like a web. Like, I don't, the reason why I say all of this is because I think it's important not to just convince people that they should just go into their, meditative subconscious mind and that's it. Now you're perfect. Like, that's one facet of personal growth and personal development. But I do believe that it's really crucially important to realize that, like, yeah, there's science behind a lot of this stuff, but we also really need to be cautious and careful about the different things that we're learning, because, you and I talk about discernment a lot. There's a lot out there that can kind of pull you off track and take you which way. But when you're just really making sure that you're being careful and taking your time and really making sure that you're feeling into your heart and your connection to God, I think that that's like the core here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. It's like, when we learn about the science and we're looking at the heart, for example, there's a literal brain there, and we have, kind of basically three brains. We have our gut, and then we have our heart, and of course we have our own mind. And then obviously there is, scientists have wondered for years, where's the actual consciousness come from? Where are these ideas coming from? why are people able to channel or to get downloads, and how can we define that frequency to know that that is our authentic self as we know it? So would you be able to touch on a little bit about finding that discernment so that we know what's true for ourselves and not just following somebody else?
Yeah, it's so important to realize that we are connected and we are one. I think that that's kind of the first part of what you were bringing up there. Like when you start to realize that everything is just a reflection of how we perceive reality, then it helps us kind of step out of that space, and there are higher levels of truth. And what I also see, and this is just my perspective, I believe that there are dimensions of reality. And what I mean by that is, like, when I say dimension, I mean perspective. And there are so many different perspectives. Like we're all just facets of the mind of God playing out certain facets of perspective and reflections in different dimensions of thought, or what I call islands of thought. And so this all comes into this big tapestry of the mind of God. And my tagline is, all around us are pieces of the gigantic cosmic puzzle. Let's attune to its frequency. And so when we start thinking about thoughts or, facets of consciousness as holding certain levels of frequency, then what you start to realize is that there are different points of frequency within consciousness. Every thought has a certain kind of, if you want to put it in physical terms, weight. And so I like to equate this to, like, let's say that you're sitting around a conference table at work, and there's that one person who always has all the best ideas. You have people try to throw in an idea and it just kind of falls flat and people don't really catch it. But then there's that one person who says that one thing and everyone goes, oh, that's a great idea. And then everybody gets really energetic. They get energized. Someone jumps up to the whiteboard, and now everybody's imagineering around that one person's idea. And so the way that I like to describe that is that thoughts have weight. And so when we start to think about thoughts like that, you want to ask yourself, well, what has more weight? And I say the more love a thought has, it's going to have more weight, right? It's going to be stronger. But you would actually say, I guess, in frequency terms, it would be lighter. But it's interesting, the inversion there. And so I think it's really cool to think about it this way. And so we can think like, well, how can I really be attractive? And when I say attractive, I don't mean physically attractive. I mean spiritually attractive. And what you can do is you can actually find ways to bring love and compassion and forgiveness into your reality. And when you focus on those kinds of concepts, you're actually focusing on the better concepts that are stronger and they have more attraction to them. And so I just think it's really interesting thinking about it that way. And so shifting now and answering your question directly about, like, how can we have discernment? I think that, God teaches us through every experience that we are having. So I think it's so beautiful to consider that every single facet of God, every single person on this planet right now, they're experiencing something. And everything that every single person is experiencing has the capacity and opportunity to learn from that experience in whatever way that they are being tempered. Their soul is being tempered. They have this opportunity to step into and lean into temperance. And I think that's so exciting. It's just so fun. And so even when it comes to concepts like, how do we discern? How do we know what's real? Who do we follow? Like, all these questions, they're all beautiful questions. And the answer is going to be dependent on that fortune cookie in your hand at that very, very moment. Because I believe every single moment we have a choice to take what we're receiving, and then we're kind of like holding it in our hand, and we're going like, how do I want to receive this? How do I want to perceive this? And we go through ups and downs. There's rhythm in life. And so there are going to be things that you're going to believe that are false, and you're going to go through that realization that it's false. And then you're going to have learned from that. So it's actually good that you believed it for a period of time. Why? Because you were brought through that whole experience in order to better understand why it was false. And so I think we need to be caring and forgiving to each other and loving to each other as we're all going through parts of our journey, and allowing the other reflection of the mind of God in the other person, who's actually a reflection of yourself, to go through that process of discovery. And we can help each other by, teaching and speaking about the things that we've learned, but also tapping into what it is that God wants for your life and doing that part. And then what I always say is, like, allow people to be in their lanes, respect each other's lanes, because there are other lanes that people are going to be playing out that they need to play out, that's all a part of it. And that's not your lane. So let them be in their lane, and you're going to collaborate. You're going to find other people that seem to sync up with you, that synchronize with your lane. And that's where collaboration comes in. And I just think that this whole process is absolutely just a process of discovery.
Yeah, no, that just hits me right there. So, we're like, one of the things that I was thinking while you're talking was the fact that, when we were looking at discernment and we were looking at this world as it is with, viruses and hornets and all this like destruction, that people kind of see around us, is that like when we get into this level of creation and in this attunement, the divine frequency, as you call it, or we look at or if you want to be a scientific person looking into the quantum fields, then when we tap into that energy, into that God feeling, into that Christ light or the Buddha consciousness, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. But when we tap into that, we can actually rise above this, the storm that's happening all around us, and it doesn't affect us as much. And I was wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit about that as well.
Absolutely.
Rising above the matrix.
Yeah, I think that the largest part that has been coming up for me lately in what you're discussing is the concept of resistance. So instead of resisting, accepting, when you move out of resistance, which what does that do? Resistance creates separation. Resistance states that there is the other, that there is something that you want to get away from, that there's something to be rejected. But because we live in the mind of the all, what about instead switching that perspective into complete and utter acceptance? What it does is it stops this rhythm, it stops the flow, and it steps into the idea that there actually is no other, that all exists in the mind of God. And when we can bring this kind of philosophy into our every waking moment, what you'll notice is the resistance in your life starts to dissipate. So when you look outside of yourself and you see resistance happening outside of you, it's like, how can I transmute this on a personal level? And so when we see the reflection of, the earth going through a purge and whatever this is that's happening, that's going on right now, if we can take that a step within and say, okay, whatever is going on internally inside of every single individuated facet of God is a reflection, and it's as within, so without, as above, so below. What can we do right now to accept what's happening? And so I think for me, like, I'm noticing that, especially right now, there are a lot of people that are going through this kind of quiet time because they're at home, they're quarantining, they're not really out and about and being social. And so it's forcing everybody to take that kind of mirror and reflect back to themselves, going like, well, who am I? Who am I in this time? And what is this as an opportunity for me for growth? And I'm finding that a lot of people are going through this beautiful cocoon phase right now where new projects are starting to take form. And what this is forcing everyone to do is go like, maybe the world, maybe I'm a little bit more powerful than the world might tell me, like I think people are starting to learn to kind of tap in a little bit more into this quantum field, so to speak, and ask themselves, like, in this time, like we're existing in time right now, what can I do to change the reflection of what I'm seeing outside? And it's forcing people to realize that there is a spirit, a great spirit, a Holy Spirit, this God essence that flows through us, that we are connected to, that can actually be harnessed. And I'm actually seeing a huge turnover right now in attitude and expression. What about you?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely seeing like a lot of people changing how they're looking at this thing. I mean, they're like myself, when I started this, basically really started this journey, minus like the the dreams that I had when I was younger was that 9/11 event. And I went through this period, a long period of time of anger.
Mhm.
And when we're looking at that dark side of ourselves that we don't want to look at, all the things that we're frustrated as maybe as we were a kid, or maybe past lives, or wherever it came from, or society. I went through that whole anger thing, and everything was a conspiracy. Well, not everything, but most things were a conspiracy, and the New World Order is out to get you, and blah blah blah. Like, watch out for this and that, and then I found through that some spiritual people that were talking more spiritual, and they were talking about all of these things, and then I started to realize, okay, well, these aren't, it's fun to look at these conspiracies, and I still think it's important to so we don't forget where we came from, and so that we can sort of inverse that reflection and be like, okay, this is where we were and this is who we were, but okay, it's important maybe to know a little bit about that story. How can we reverse it? How can we change the timeline? And I'm sort of, I always wonder, like, sometimes I wake up in the morning, I'm like, did I just like jump, some sort of dimensional line? Am I in a different parallel reality that's very similar to what I was before I woke up? And I think that's really interesting, as you were talking way earlier about all the different paths that people are on, just like, don't go into their lane. Like, well, don't go into their parallel reality is like your reality, and you can continue moving forward to that. So, I mean, I think that's really cool. And that, I don't know, this is like brings up another question in my mind, and some things that people that could start looking into is dreams and out of body experiences and different things like that. Like, can you speak a little bit about maybe some of your experiences and like what happened there?
Yeah, and I want to speak a little bit to what you said before, and then I'll get into that. The idea of when you go in to consume information, it's important, I believe, to know what's going on. There's a level of that. It's totally acceptable to be educated, right? I think that where we get into trouble is when you allow, and I talk about frequency matching, when you allow information to bring you into their frequency construct. So when you read something and now you start frequency matching the fear or whatever that looks like, it's important to understand that this is a potential, right? So being aware that it's extremely important what you consume, number one, and number two, how you consume it. Now, these are things that I've been deeply considering since I was young, but especially when I went to college. Like, my first paper at 16, I wrote, "We need to critique the images and messages received through mainstream media outlets." That was like my thesis. I've been like on this shtick for a while. So what I am very strong in my belief on is that we just have to be really careful and try to bring in love into these situations. I find, especially in alternative media, I think there's more fear porn in alternative media than there is in mainstream media. I'm sorry, I said it. Sorry, not sorry. But there is a level of, conspiracy content that drags people into this like paranoid state, and people start to become paranoid of everything. I've been through this with people. I've seen people that struggle to be able to even have interpersonal relationships because they are so highly paranoid about every person having an agenda. And this is extremely dangerous because you're cutting yourself off from love. And we were just talking about the quantum field. I was talking about how you have to shut off the unconscious programming telling you that life is going to be exactly how it was so that you can allow it to be the eternal now. And this speaks to what you were just saying about when you're learning about history, which I do believe is important. If you continue to perpetuate that frequency of the past, you're actually frequency matching that and not allowing yourself to tap into the quantum state, which allows you to go through like what you were talking about with quantum leaps, quantum jumps, timeline shifts, those kinds of things, which happen in the quantum state, where instead of living in space-time, you're living in time-space, right? It switches and you're able to frequency match a new reality. So you quite literally do hop to another timeline because you're waking up in a different world. Now, it's important to consistently tap into that state and being open to that so that you don't start frequency matching from the past again and start falling back into those fear-based states. So that's just from the beginning part. And then I don't know if you had something you wanted to say, but then I can answer your other question.
No, I have to agree with majority of what you said there for sure. I mean, yeah, I've definitely seen myself in the past being like going like, wow, this is like amazing, and then like start looking at that fear porn, and it is true. I do have to agree with you. A lot of this alternative media, there is a lot of that going on, and yeah, there's certain people that I just won't listen to anymore because of that. But every once in a while, I'll take a peek because sometimes those people they do all of a sudden like have this frequency that's matching mine, but as soon as they sort of dive back into this like negative thing, I turn it off. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But yeah, let's jump into that magical world of dreams and out-of-body experiences. Like, what's that all about?
Yeah. So, okay, let's see. The first out-of-body experience I had was a total accident. I wasn't trying to have an out-of-body experience. That's what I'll just say. I was dreaming, and then all of a sudden I was standing next to my body, and I looked down, and there was like a cord going from the center of my body to my body. And I'm like, what is going on? And I remember I thought that there was sunlight pouring in the window. And then I realized it wasn't sunlight. It was that every object had an intrinsic quality of light. And I know now I was seeing the quantum field, but I didn't know what was going on then. I'm like, what is happening? And my body was really light, and I had no pain in my body. Like my back wasn't aching, like there was no pain. And then I remember floating through the door. I realized I could float, and then I float down the hallway, and I turn, and I'm looking in the living room, and I could zoom my consciousness in. I remember there's the couch in the living room, and I could zoom my consciousness in and see like every different filament of fabric and how they overlaid on top of each other. It was so beautiful that I felt like I was going to cry, because I'm like, you become like overwhelmed with divine order. Like you're seeing the order in every single facet of what we perceive as physical reality, which is really just light. And so I go into the kitchen, and there's my plate sitting on the counter. And then I laughed to myself because I had left my plate on the counter, which I had forgotten. I didn't know that I had left my plate on the counter, but it was a confirmation that I was actually standing in my kitchen, because I'm going like, okay, I'm clearly having an out-of-body experience because I didn't remember this was here. And so I remember floating back to my body, waking up, and then like going into the kitchen and seeing where the plate was. And so it was like it was a confirmation that had literally happened. It was crazy.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Those experiences are really unique, and I never had like a full body experiences, but I've had, definitely knew that I was dreaming. I've had, different lucid dreamings happened to me a few times, and again, they weren't something that I was trying to do. It just sort of happened, and then you realize, wait a minute, I can control what's going on here. I could jump, I could fly. And, I think one of my more recent dreams that this happened, again, it was I didn't have an intention or anything. It just happened, and then realized, and for some reason I had to use like this broomstick to fly around, but not like a traditional witch, but I just had to hold on to it for balance purposes. I don't know why, but that was the dream. So, and I was like, frantically, I remember in the dream, I was like trying to find like my cell phone or some sort of camera so I could take a picture and show it. But that was like the odd part, because it was like there was part of me that's like, you can't take this into this now anyway, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, I mean, all of these things, if we're open to it, there's also, I mean, if people look for it, there's different techniques if you want to. This is the path you want to go on. There's different techniques that you can learn how to awaken in your dreams, and then there's lots of different ways that you can teach yourself how to do that, if that's something that you're interested in doing, of course. But this is like the strangeness and the really cool thing about life is there's so many different paths that we can look into. We can look into magic and all those types of things and how that really works. One thing that, speaking of that, when you started Divine Frequency, you talked about writing on the whiteboard and all these things. And I always laugh. I have to look at some of the work at, even of like way back of Jordan Maxwell. And I always laugh at those when, like, because this brings light to what the powers that were, or whatever you want to call them, were doing. They were using these spells and they were using these things, and we're able to, once we realize that has power and we can use that ourselves, we can realize like how to use those things in a positive light. And could you speak a little bit to like how we can actually make our own sort of spell, our own magic?
I have a lot to say about all you said. So let's see. Okay, so I did want to take a couple steps back though and talk about like out-of-body experiences and lucid dreaming and that kind of thing, because I do think that there is and I talk about avoiding traps a lot on Divine Frequency because I've been through some stuff, as we all have. But I think that there is a level of escapism that can be inherent here. The danger for that, I guess, so to speak. Like I've seen people get just totally wrapped up in feeling like they're not enough. Like, oh, I'm not enough. I need to be able to lucid dream. I need to be able to come out of my body. Like, and they start like incorrectly assigning need or desire into something that is really not necessary. Like this is again, opinion alert. I think that the more we try to seek outside of ourselves for something, we forget the truth. And the truth is that you are exactly who you need to be. You are a divine soul. You have a spark inside of you that tethers you to God every single step of the way. There's nothing that you need to become in order to be tethered to God. You're already tethered to God. So accepting that, I think, is like super important. And these types of experiences, like, I don't even necessarily think they need to be like evoked. I mean, I know that people have different perspectives on this, but I think that it's important for everybody, like I said, to have their lane. Like if you're feeling drawn to something, God is speaking to you, and you are going that path because it's how the Spirit's leading you, whatever that is, like focus on that. There are a lot of distractions out there. And unfortunately, I think that especially in our day and age with the internet and all the information that's out there, we can get trapped and tricked and then trapped into these cycles of, oh, you need to be more, you need to develop yourself, you need to become, you need to, all these, it gets in your head and you start to feel lesser about yourself. And then you start to become like even fearful that you're not enough. And so there are a lot of like negative emotions that can be associated to a lot of this content, which is why a huge passion of mine is speaking to these more like gray areas that people don't really want to discuss, because all butterflies and rainbows, everyone wants to sit around talking about astral projection and how you can learn how to 1, 2, 3 lucid dream, where I'm over here going, okay, but that's really shiny. And we need to just be really careful about how we're teaching, like how we're approaching these subjects, especially with people who are just going through their awakening. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of disorientation. And so that's just a little bit of a soapbox on that. Also, the topic of magic in itself, that is like such a huge topic. I mean, I wrote a book about it. And then after I wrote the book about it, that's whenever like a whole bunch of other stuff happened, so I'm writing a second book. But the idea here is that this is again, opinion alert. I think that there are dangers even with starting to look into things like magic. Why? Because you're starting to ascribe desire and need and power into objects. And I think if we take this down a level and we just talk about consciousness, like take this out of the magical realm, because I think the word magic itself has a stigma attached to it. So let's just kind of like take this down to science. Consciousness. We have the power of thought. Okay, everyone can agree with that. Well, cool. Now you can choose like how to use your thoughts or how to use your brain to structure things in a certain way that help you achieve certain things. So like, let's say that you really want to build a shed in your backyard. Okay, so how are you going to use your power of consciousness to do that? Well, you're probably going to organize. You're going to create a plan. You're going to write some steps out. You're going to Imagineer. You're going to go to the store. You're going to buy some materials. You're going to come home. You're going to, so you're using your power of thought to organize and then create something. So, and this is just this is life. This is how we live our lives. And so then you get into this realm of magic, or people will call like spells and things like that. What is that? What is a spell? What is magic in that kind of context? Again, words have so many different meanings that we really need to define any way that we're going to use a word. Now, you can use the word magic in the sense of like witchcraft, where, you know, you're taking an object and you're infusing it with your consciousness. Okay, I'm going to meditate on this object and I'm going to say that this object represents XYZ, and then you're going to like burn it for some, you know, whatever. You have all these different rituals that you are using to make your power of thought more nuanced or powerful or whatever. Okay, so that's really like, I'm just going to lay that out. But then you have the concept of a gray area between the paranormal and the supernatural, which I need to talk about. So you have the paranormal, which is like normal abilities that we have as humans, like the power of consciousness, the power of thought, et cetera, et cetera. And there are things that we don't have the scientific tools to prove yet, but they exist. This is like, you know, lucid dreaming, or, you know, I had a friend visit me in a dream. Okay, how do you explain that? Clearly, it's some kind of human ability, but we don't have the physical tools to explain that. Maybe one day we will. Who knows, right? But then we have the supernatural. The supernatural is beyond the physical. This is like beings beyond the physical, like that kind of stuff going on that we will never have the physical tools to prove. Why? Because it's not in our physical realm. Therefore, no physical tools can prove it. Now, I believe that there is a nexus point between the paranormal and the supernatural, wherein we can open things called portals or doorways or whatever you want to call them, where you are now opening yourself up for possibly negative entities, possibly positive entities. The fact of the matter is, it's a doorway, things can come through. So there is danger inherent here when you are stepping into the unknown, where you're using or trying to activate or trying to develop these paranormal abilities that you have that are natural. But when we start to walk into that space, I do believe that this is the space for spiritual warfare, because since we're stepping into subconscious states, we're going into meditative states. And if you're trying to call out and seek out into something, this is where we get into having to talk about divination and what that means. Because from my theological understanding, and I went to grad school last year at a seminary and I researched this, it's trying to seek answers from means that are beyond you. So like if you have a paranormal ability, that's your intuition, right? Intuition, that's just a human ability. There's nothing wrong with using your intuition. You know what I'm saying? But if you are attempting to seek out answers from sources that are beyond yourself, that is now inviting in something negative potentially. And so it's this, again, opinion alert, we have to be very careful when we trek into these areas, because there are, there are spirits out there that are powerful, and, you can come in contact with something that you're not prepared for, and it could really mess you up. And so I do believe that there is a level of, danger in all of this that we have to speak about. We just have to mention. I know that it's not warm and fuzzy. It's not love and light. People don't like to hear about it, but I feel like talking about any of this, it has to be kind of brought up. I would feel bad not bringing it up. So I know it's uncomfortable, but there it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I have to agree with that, with those statements. And those are also what I would tell people as well. I guess, the big thing is like all of these, if we're going through this journey, out of body experiences and all of these types of things, they just happen, and if they happen, they happen, and if not, then they don't. And if you're I guess I was saying is, if you're curious and you want to like look at that, be aware of what Teresa was speaking about, and I don't know, but also I think it's good to play as well, and to experience and to look at these aspects.
I'm going to jump in really quick because we had a question in the comment section that I really want to speak to. So Princess Unicorn, best name ever, says, but again, there is fear there. Fear of something negative coming in, and does that not attract it? Okay, so I think it's really important that we talk about a little bit about attraction here, because I do believe that in this world, there are things that can come into your life that you didn't think you attracted, right? That you weren't thinking like, oh, this, like, how did I get in this car accident? Surely I didn't attract this, right? And so you get into kind of this metaphysical soup of like, why do things happen? You know, and I do think that there's a level of like, we've been talking a lot about frequency matching. We've been talking about like a little bit like law of attraction stuff, quantum field, like, okay, yeah, what you put out, you get back, like, you get whatever. Okay, but I do believe that there the whole thing very complicated and complex, and there are things that are going to happen in your life that you probably didn't attract. You probably didn't sit there and go, I really want to go through a divorce, right? Okay, like things like that. But you know, taking this down into a really deep level, it's sort of like there are things out there that can happen to you that you might have like signed, and I know that this could be considered controversial, and this is just, I'm philosophizing here, that maybe you signed up for before you came into this life, that you know, you have some things that are going to come up that are going to allow you to learn and grow and things like that. So I do think that there are forces, powerful forces out there that have been there for a really, really long time. These are like supernatural forces, angelic forces, and then on the opposite side, someone said archonic forces, or, you know, negative entities that have been present for a really, really, really long time. And so they know how to manipulate, you know, these negative forces know how to manipulate. And, you know, we're here, we have physical bodies, and there are spirits out there that really want to manipulate us. And we just need to be aware of our power. And so as to speak to the question directly, it's sort of like, we don't need to be afraid because we are tethered to God, but we also need to be very responsible for that power that we have. And we can, you know, step into arenas that can actually be dangerous, and we can choose to step into those arenas or not. And that's just, I don't think that that's too controversial. I think that that's acknowledging our free will, and also bringing in a step of humility here, because I've spoken to so many people that will say, oh, well, you know, I put a white bubble of light around me, so nothing bad's going to happen to me. And it's like, okay, you say that now until something bad happens. And then you'll, you know, so again, taking this into dimensions of consciousness, we are all going through this life, and there are things that are going to arise that will likely teach us things. You know, I used to be really into all different kinds of spiritual modalities, and I had some bad things happen spiritually. I was under very clearly spiritual attack. It was very disorienting, you know, but it was something that I went through, and I believe now it was something that I was supposed to go through so that I could speak to these types of things that are very uncomfortable, that nobody wants to speak about, and a lot of things that maybe people haven't even experienced. So I will take that burden, and I know it's uncomfortable, but I will be that mouthpiece. And if people want to disagree with me or whatever, that's fine. But I think more so people are like interested in it. So I do think that as far as like any kind of magical practice goes, you can have things happen that you're not prepared for and that you did not invite in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I guess, I think you said you had like an hour, so I guess I'll finish off with, what are you working on? What are you working on now? And yeah, what's your big, what is the number one thing that you're focusing on, and that sort of thing?
Okay, so let's see. I'm working on all kinds of stuff. I just started a new video series on quantum physics. So the first one is Science of the Quantum Universe. The next one is Life of the Quantum Universe. And I had some interviews with William Henry and Billy Carson. So I've been working on that. And I'm working on lots of different collaborations right now, which is pretty cool, with lots of different people. So after I did that series, I actually had some physics professors reach out to me, and they were really excited about the content. And they're like, hey, this is great. And so I actually have, you know, some people that are sharing the content with their students, which is pretty neat. So that, and then I'm actually preparing to launch a completely different business that's going to be branded differently from Divine Frequency. That's probably just going to be branded under Teresa Yanaros. And I'm going to be basically breaking the branding business, the media business, consulting, and the branding business into its separate entity, because right now I think it's a little bit confusing, because I do like more of like the spiritual coaching and the spiritual content, and then I'm also doing the branding. So I'm gonna, I think, separate that out. So I'm sort of working through logistics on that. But yeah, just really busy. What are you up to?
Well, I'm still, luckily, I'm still working because of what the business that I'm in is considered essential. So I'm still working, and I'm just getting this podcast off the ground. I was doing, like I said to you before we started, I was doing cannabis related podcasts. Certain things happened, and in my own life, whatever. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to start doing a podcast and things that I'm more interested in, which is this world that has been opening up to me for years. And why not discuss it? Why not have people on that I'm interested in talking to and learning more about myself? So that's what I'm doing. I'm not really sure. I don't have a direct path where this podcast is going. I'm just going to let it live, and where the chips lands, it lands. And I'm happy to just like let that current flow. And I'm excited to hear more of, like, I want to hear from the people that are listening. What do they want to listen to? Who they want? What type of guests do they want? And so on and so forth. So I'll do my plug. Make sure you subscribe and like this, and also do the same for Teresa. Teresa, can you let us know where they can find your information, where they can find your book, and just let the people know what they can do to support you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, Divine Frequency. You can also go to thedivinefrequency.com and sign up for my mailing list so that you're in the loop on all the different amazing collaborations that I have going on. And then I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So that's that. But let me know how I can support you, Chris, in your endeavors. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I really look forward to watching you grow. I love your message and your mission and your vision here. I think that Wonder Without the Fear is incredible, and we need more of this. So thank you for your work.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Teresa. You have a great day.
All right, you too. Thanks, guys, for joining us in the chat. This was fun.